Thank you all so much for joining us for the Medical School Application Prep Workshop. Joining us today is Aaron Chang. He was a Grad Double Advantage mentee graduate, a Grad Double Advantage co-mentor. He just earned his Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences and also a Bachelor in Arts in Psychology with a minor in Neuroscience. And he was just accepted with full funding to the University of Texas, San Antonio for a MD and PhD program. So he's here with us today just to share his knowledge, his experiences, the important steps of the medical school application process, essential pieces of an application, and how some tips on how to increase your chance of getting accepted. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to him to get us started.
Thank you. So yeah, my name is Aaron. I graduated from UNLV last December, and I'm getting ready for a big move to the University of Texas to do my MD PhD. Um, but today I wanted to spend maybe 20 to 30 minutes just really showing everyone my AMCAS application and showcasing how I approached the application itself and most importantly, the writing. So as everyone knows, the writing part of any application is brutal. And med school application is, not an exception to that rule. The medical school application, for those that don't know, it's made up of, I feel, two big parts of writing. The first part is your personal statement, right? You have to have that good, strong, convincing personal statement. I'm not really going to go over my personal statement here. However, I will give some general suggestions. And the reason being is personal statements are very unique to everyone and can be approached in so many different ways, right? And so I feel that me showing everyone my personal statement and reading it for you guys won't really be that beneficial just because it's so unique to me, right? And I don't know your guys' stories. So what I feel is more helpful is just a general overview of how the personal statement is and how I feel that one should approach that. But what I'm actually going to really spend a lot of time in today is going through all of my activities. So all of my extracurriculars, right? The AMCAS application gives you an opportunity to showcase 15 of those extracurriculars or volunteering or shadowing events that you did during your undergrad, which is very nice. And they give you a small little paragraph to write about it. In addition to that, 3 of those 15 activities can be designated as most meaningful. And what that allows you to do is if you hit that yes, this is the most meaningful experience to me, it opens up a huge text box and you could elaborate more on that activity. And so let me share my screen. Let's see. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
All right. So this is my AMCAS report for the 2022 entering class. Now, there are a few things that I want to highlight. The first is the timeline at which I applied, and then I'm just going to go through this application and really just, break it down for you guys, which I found very helpful when I was applying. I mean, I wish someone did a workshop like this for me. So the first thing I want to show is the report date, or excuse me, not the report date, the submission date. That's the important one. So what this date is, and can you guys see my mouse moving?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just double checking. So this is the submission date. I submitted my application on June 17th of 2021 at 10:50 a.m. And for those of you that don't know, the application opens in mid May. It lets you put in all of your activities, all your grades, et cetera, et cetera. And you could once you're done with that, you could submit your AMCAS application to the actual AMCAS services for them to process it, meaning they need to verify all the information, verify all the grades, get you your GPA that they calculate. So you could hit that submission on June 1st. That's the absolute earliest you can submit it. I would recommend submitting your application as early as possible just because it takes a long time for them to process this application. The faster your application processes, the quicker you can receive secondary applications for medical schools. Now, secondary applications are a whole nother animal and part of this application process, but this is what's called a primary. So again, the closer to that June 1st date you submit your AMCAS application, the better. And so you could see here, like I submitted 17 days late, which isn't terrible, but it took them over a month to process it. So this process date over here, it's July 21st. And so in that time between June 17th to July 21st, you really don't know what's happening. You haven't gotten any secondaries yet. All you could do is pre-write secondaries and in preparation of receiving them. And so this is really a critical time. So the earlier or the closer this date is to June 1st, the better, because the quicker they'll process it. Now, I've seen some applications where the submission date is June 1st and the process date is June 2nd. That's possible. Now, for me, it took a little over a month, which is fine too. So this is around the date where I started getting secondaries. And it's quite interesting how that works because you get your email from AMCAS saying that your application has been fully processed and sent to medical schools, and like within the hour, you start receiving secondary applications just from like the automated ones, right? So that was quite interesting. But other than that, that's really the most important part of this page. There's, basic information here, but biographic information, et cetera, et cetera. They do ask you about your languages, your childhood information, your income, how you're paying for post-secondary education. But that's all, unique to everyone. Now, this section, the disadvantaged explanation or the disadvantaged information, I really wanted to point this out because this is an opportunity for all applicants to discuss any difficulties they had, whether it was, socioeconomic or their upbringing or their experience in undergrad. It could be, a wide array of things. But this allows you to really highlight some challenges that you had to overcome anytime in your lifetime. And so for me, I talked about a lot of things, but most importantly, but more generally, I talked about my upbringing. And so, I mean, if you quickly read this, it's growing up. My parents were constantly working due to the difficulties of recently immigrating from China. Finding stable work was difficult for them due to the inherent language and technical barriers they had. This forced them, especially my father, to work multiple jobs, resulting in an unsteady income. I was fortunate to have an older sister and grandma present to care for me as my parents were working most of my childhood. Despite never seeing my parents, my childhood was filled with meaningful relationships. I loved spending time with my grandmas, even if I did not know when I could return home, because through her, I learned about my culture and my parents' journey. I learned to appreciate their hard work, even if it meant we could not spend time together. Additionally, I am very grateful for the countless hours my older sister spent tutoring me. Because of her, I was able to learn English earlier in life, making school much easier compared to her own experience. Later in life, my mother's cancer diagnosis presented new challenges. My father, unwilling to use my college funds, picked up an extra job to afford her radiation and surgery. It was in these experiences that I truly appreciated the collective efforts of my family. I have them to thank for never feeling the pressures of being disadvantaged. And so I wanted to read that out loud because this is written in such a way that I'm not really saying I'm disadvantaged, like directly saying I was disadvantaged and I grew up poor and I had all these challenges, right? I was twisting it to a more positive light. And I feel that that's such a good approach to the entire application itself. Having that positive twist to everything, instead of saying, I had a hard childhood, it was a tough time growing up, almost lost my mom, I changed it to a a more meaningful and a more beneficial perspective or a lens of positivity, if you will. So that I'll leave that there. You could always pause this video because I know this is being recorded and uploaded on YouTube. You could always pause this video and really break this disadvantage essay down, and see how I approach this writing. So that's that section. Aside from that, this is all just general information as well. And then you get to the academic report or the record. This academic record will take you some time. It'll take you probably a, a few hours, if not a few days. This took me a few days to do. So once you enter the AMCAS application, what you will see is basically a huge chart that you need to fill out. It'll ask you for every single credit you have taken in your undergrad, including AP credits that have transferred from high school. This is a process. And to do this, you need to ask UNLV for official transcripts. You need to send one to AMCAS for verification purposes, and then you send one to yourself, which is kind of odd. And so you order an official transcript to yourself, you open it up, you verify that all the grades on it are correct, and then you essentially just start copying it into this application. So you'll put what term you took it, the course number itself, the course name, exactly how it's printed on your transcript, what type of course it was, whether it was advanced placement, so AP in high school, pass fail. There's some honors courses that will receive special designation, like here. And then it'll ask you for how many hours it counted for, or how many credit hours it counted for, and then the grade you received. And then it's interesting how they have two columns for grades. One is the one you put in, and then AMCAS will also give you a grade. That's just them verifying it. And so, like, for example, here, for biology 494, I indicated that I got an S because UNLV uses the satisfactory, unsatisfactory grading scale for their pass fail classes. However, AMCAS uses pass fail, or P and F. And so that's just some little things that you notice here. And so these were all of the grades, and this is what you need to report. It's really, really important and crucial that you put it exactly how it's reported on your official transcript. Other than that, I applied the first semester of my senior year. And so SR standing for senior, these were all the classes I was taking in senior year, and it says current/future. Now, obviously I've graduated already and I have my grades for these classes, but this is what it looks like when you apply. And then you also, if you have already enrolled in classes by the time you submit your application, which you should have, meaning fall of your last year, you can put, or spring of your last year, you can put all of your grades here and then just put current or future. So that's very helpful as long as you're enrolled in those. Then it'll ask you about your education, which is, whatever bachelor degrees you've had. And then this part. This is the dreaded part that everyone hates, the statistics part. This is what AMCAS calls their verified grade point averages. So your grade point average that is reported on your official transcript may be different from what AMCAS credits you for. And it's weird. There's a whole formula that they use, but they break it down into 3 totals. So they have all the years. They have high school, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, post-bac, cumulative undergrad, and even graduate school if you got a master's or got a PhD and you're going back to medical school. And so you have Bcpm, which is essentially just a fancy way of saying your science. So it's biology, chemistry, psychology, and math, or physics and math, excuse me. This is the GPA, the cumulative science GPA that I applied with. This is all other, so 3.92. That one doesn't matter as much because med schools will focus on your total and your science GPA. And then my overall total when I was applying was a 3.81. So this is all calculated by AMCAS. For me, this was the same as my unofficial transcript, but I have seen instances where it's different. So just be mindful of that. And then the MCAT score. So when you take your MCAT, as soon as the score releases, it'll pop up in your application like this. And when I applied with, well, I took it on May 1st, just to highlight that real quick. May 1st, for me, was the absolute latest I could take it because the AMCAS application opens on June 1st. So that meant I got my score back on June 1st. And of course, from earlier in the presentation, I didn't actually end up applying on June 1st, but I applied pretty close. And so May 1st, I had originally planned my MCAT for March, but that didn't happen. I needed more time to study, so I pushed it back all the way till May, and it worked out. I got a 511 with a confidence band, so plus or minus of 2. So my range was a 509 to a 513. My percentile rank was 81st percentile, which meant my score of a 511 for that test date and that test itself was higher than 81% of everyone else who took it in the nation. And then it gives you your score breakdown. So in the chemistry and physics section, I scored a 125, which was at the 52nd percentile. The critical analysis and reasoning skills, I got a score of 128, which was a percentile of 90. On the biology section, I scored a 129, which is also 90. And then finally, the psych and sociology section, I scored a 129 as well. And that was ranked at 85th percentile. So all in all, I got a score of 511 and 81st percentile. The next part of the application is the experiences. And so this is what it looks like when you put it in. It'll ask you the experience type. They have a drop-down menu. You get to select which one it's most applicable to. You'll get to type in the experience name yourself, the dates in which you did it, and the total hours. And then they also ask you for a contact name and a title, the organization, where you did it, etc., etc. Now, notice that this one is indicated as a most meaningful experience. And so without that most meaningful experience, all you would see is the experience description, which is this small little paragraph here. But as soon as you hit most meaningful experience, it'll open up this larger section. And so I'm not going to read these to you, but I would give some general suggestions as to how to write them. And my general suggestion on how to write these is tell a story, right? I mean, I know you guys hear this all the time, but it really is an art to tell a story of your life and what you did in undergrad and how that geared you towards applying to medical school. And so how I approached it was in my and this is only for the most meaningful experiences. This is how I approached it. I used the experience description to give like a more technical description of what my roles were, how I got involved, what I did during my time as a volunteer here, etc., etc. So it was more technical, very straightforward. And then I used the most meaningful experience to really tell a story. So whether that was a specific instance or a specific patient that I met in this experience, or if it was more generally like how this experience impacted me or changed me as a person, I used the most meaningful remarks to really tell that story. So that's how I approached this one. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, same thing with this one. This is also a most meaningful experience. Tell a nice story. Now, for the regular experiences, and so I'm going to bring your attention to this one. This was in the UNLV Department of Psychology. When you're given such a small amount of space to tell a story, you got to be creative with how you do this. And so, with just a few sentences, I was able to show them that this is why I did this experience, and this is how this experience has changed me. And again, for those of you watching the YouTube video, feel free to pause these and, read it. It's here for you to read. And so I use this space to really try to convince the admissions committee that this wasn't just me checking boxes and getting things done on my CV. It was more of I did this for a reason. And the reason was this, A, B, and C. This has changed me in these ways, or this experience has made me a better person for these reasons. Those are the kind of questions that they will be asking when reading your application. And so that's really what I geared these experience descriptions to do. Now, jumping around to the extracurricular activities or the programs and academies. This I had to get creative. And so AMCAS only gives you 15 slots to put your extracurriculars in. Some people will fill all 15 and it'll be great, it'll be perfect. Some people will only fill out 10 or 11 or 12 of those experiences. For me, I filled out all 15 and I still had more to tell. And so when you run into a scenario like that, you need to get creative. What I did was I grouped together all of those like summer programs, all of the uh, extra classes I took at different universities. I took all of those and I grouped them together. So I grouped them into this one activity. So instead of like picking one of these and writing out a description for just one of those, I only wrote a few words as a description for each and every one of these. And what I did was I put the name of the program that I attended, the date that I attended it, the contact, because it's very important, and then like a one sentence description of what the program was. And so, like, for example, I have this one, the University of Pittsburgh's McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine Summer School. That was in the summer of 2020, and this was the contact, and this is what the program did. Like, that was perfect. I was able to squeeze, whoa, excuse me. I was able to squeeze 4 of those in there. So that was very helpful, right? In terms of squeezing everything into an application. Now, would I recommend doing this? If you don't have to, I wouldn't. But if space doesn't allow you to include what you want to include and feel that is absolutely necessary for your application to shine, I would do this. Like, this is a good way to clump things together and still get the message sent across, right? And then this is my main shadowing. So for those of you that want to read it, please feel free to. But I shadowed Dr. David Cotter here in town. He is also an MD PhD. So it was very helpful for me as an aspiring MD PhD. And then I told the story. Instead of saying what I did while shadowing him, I mean, sure, I could have wrote, yeah, I showed up to his clinic. We sat down, did a briefing every morning, and I followed him from room to room, patient to patient. Everyone knows what shadowing is, right? If you say shadowing, most everyone in the medical field will have a good idea of what shadowing looks like. You don't need to tell them again what shadowing looks like. What you do need to tell them is how that shadowing has changed you, or how I approached it was I basically told the story of how I met Dr. Cotter, and it was a unique story. I mean, if you read this, like, uh, a more toned down version of this experience description is I met him through like Instagram, and he was a UNLV grad. He did his undergrad at UNLV. I found that interesting. He was back at UNL. He was back in Las Vegas practicing medicine, so I just shot him a message on Instagram, and I invited him in to give a seminar series talk at the School of Life Sciences, which was quite fun to watch. And then after his talk, I went up to him. I said, "Hey man, can I shadow you?" That's how I met him, and that's essentially what I wrote here. Now, obviously, I wrote it in a more elegant way, but that's how I approach shadowing. And then another thing I want to highlight is for those of you that have done a lot of research, when I applied to medical school, I think I had like 14 different poster presentations and authorship on those posters. And so it was really difficult to pick which ones were going to end up on my application. Instead, what I did was I I just made an entire experience as selected research presentations. And I really just wrote out the titles of all of the important presentations. And so I picked the biggest ones I gave, right? So I presented at Harvard one time, and then I presented at our School of Medicine one time. And so I presented at NIH, their Western Region Conference. So the big ones, right? The meaningful ones. I picked those and I just wrote the title, where I presented it, and how I presented it. So all of these were posters except for my thesis defense. And so these were all posters and the date. So that's how I approached this. I just broke it apart, I grouped it together again, and I picked the most important ones. And then, yeah, going on from there, another thing I would do is, here we are, awards. So research awards and funding. This one, when you're applying to medical school, you may have some awards that you've racked up throughout undergrad or your post-bac or your grad school years, which is great. However, you're going to have multiple awards, and sitting there and picking just one to showcase is incredibly difficult. And so instead of just picking one, I grouped them together, right? So I put all of my research awards and funding into one. So I had a scholarship here, summer funding for research here, an undergraduate research recognition here. So I grouped them together, and then the one that was most meaningful to the Barry Goldwater Scholar, this is a huge national scholarship that I actually did not get. And so I received the UNLV's nomination, but nationally I didn't get this award. And I felt that that was an important story to tell. So I actually wrote like 3 sentences here just highlighting that. And then the other ones didn't need an explanation. So you could get creative with how you write your experiences, is basically what I'm trying to get at. Just be creative with the limited space that you're given. And then again, all of those scholarships here. So university merit scholarships, I just listed them. University nominations and awards, I just listed those as well as the university recognitions. So I listed it, and then if you got it multiple times, you could just do it x5 or times however many of times you got it. And then this is a good example of how to break apart two semi-meaningful experiences. And what I mean by that is, by itself, I don't think each and every one of these was deserving of its own space. However, I could condense each one of these experiences and make them their own. And so I just put the title, the dates, how many hours I did that experience for, the contact, and then a small little description. And so again, I was just being creative with the space I was given. But that was about it. The rest of this application is research here, and then it'll ask you for your personal statement, which again, I'm not going to go over for reasons that personal statements are unique to everyone, and there are a lot of ways you could approach it. And so if you have any questions about the personal statement, please reach out to me. And then for those of you that are interested in MD PhD, it gives you a whole nother section where you need to write, I believe it was 10,000 characters worth of an MD PhD essay and a significant research experience. So that was my application. I mean, past this, there was letters of recommendation. So all of your letter writers will be here. And then finally, the list of schools that you pick. So you pick to send your application to. It'll have the school name, the program type, whether it's, for me, it was MD, PhD, potential PhD awards or areas, and then just regular MD schools as well. So yeah, that was the application. I mean, I'll scroll through the bottom of this just so you get an idea of how many schools I applied to. I believe it was over 25. And then that was it. So I will stop sharing my screen at this time and take some questions.
Anyone have any questions for Aaron? Now's the time to ask.
You could also type it in the chat. What I will do is leave my email. And if you want a PDF copy of what I just showed you guys, reach out to me and I'll be happy to send it over. So in the chat, that's my email. If you have a question, shoot it my way.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and thank you for sharing your personal experience, because that just gives us a deeper look into what it's actually like. It's different to just, go look it up online and look at all the steps, but actually seeing the process that you did was really helpful. It looks like we do have a question in the chat. You mentioned preparing for secondaries even before you got the formal invitations. What types of things did you get started on?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Since I set my primary in around mid-June and didn't get it processed until late July, you have that whole month to essentially do what's called pre-writing. What you can do is, if you know, for example, you're going to apply to UNLV School of Medicine, you could Google UNLV Kirk Kerkorian School of Medicine secondary prompts. And most likely you'll find a series of websites that just have a bank of the old or previous year's secondary questions or prompts and the word limit. And so what I did was I put all of those prompts to all the schools that I knew I was going to apply to in a Word doc, and then I just pre-wrote the secondaries. And 99% of the time, the secondary questions were the same. Maybe not 99, 95% of the time, the secondary questions were exactly the same, word for word, with the same character count. So I would just pre-write it all. And then once the application got processed, I copy and pasted my responses into their secondary portal. Does that answer your question, Jessica? You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. Well, you guys have my email if anything comes up.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Erin. We really appreciate your time and your experience that you've shared with us here today.